a foreigner, you're coming to a different country and you don't know what you're exposed to. You don't know what you don't know. Yeah. So it seems logical. It seems logical, but there can be a lot of consequences if you don't go down that road of doing everything properly, because one, the liability, and two, if you want to sell your property, they require everything be up to date and that you paid all your social security dues. They can block loans for potential buyers.
So you could have paid all cash, but when you want to sell on your property, if you did renovations or you built it indeed and you didn't regularize it at the time, you've got consequences. Okay, well, I am here today with Lucas, who is one of the members of accå Architects. They're a very young company, 3 architects, but they've already been winning prizes internationally and mentions and things. Amazing. I'm very excited to be able to talk to you about everything to do with building and renovating homes in Uruguay. How much does it cost to build?
This is obviously one of the first questions that clients ask us, and what we start out with is telling them that having a very thought out plan beforehand is probably the thing that helps the most with costs, and times obviously with influence cost back in the line. So yeah, basically having a plan beforehand is the most important thing to control cost. And then renovations, renovations and new builds, they can range from 500 to 1,000 per square meter, and then a new build, a good base would be about 1,600, and then all the way up to 2,500 or whatever you desire. And the makeup of those costs can be labor, obviously, which can be cheaper than the States or even Europe, and then materials, which in a small market like Uruguay can obviously vary a lot more, and we have issues with some limited stock of some items. So those are usually what can make up the cost of a renovation or a new build.
Your English is so good. How come it's so good?
I lived in the States for 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where?
Wisconsin.
Okay.
So for all the Midwesterns out there.
So what surprised you? Work with a lot of foreigners, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's the reason that I was told that I needed to talk to you guys. What surprises people, maybe even shocks people most about taking on a building project here?
So a quick example of that, we had a client who wanted to do a quick demo, just integrate a bathroom with a bedroom, and just tear down some walls and whatnot. And when we told her that her walls were brick, she was taken aback. What do you mean my walls are brick? She wasn't used to that. So some of those cultural differences between the materials that houses and homes are made of can shock some people. But to our surprise, we love that story because she wasn't bummed out. It opened a whole new world of possibilities for her with the brick and whatnot. So
but it was also going to take much more time.
Yes, that's
dust.
That's the second part of the answer. So even though she loved brick, what we had to tell her that wasn't so good was that it takes a lot more time. It's a lot more labor intensive. Dust can get everywhere. But those are usually what can surprise people right away. After that, there's permits, times of all the processes, dealing with the social security office or bank, as we call it here.
Yeah, tell me about that.
The BPS. So the BPS is comparable to the Social Security office in the United States. They handle all welfare. They also handle retirement and health. So as a homeowner, you are obligated to pay a certain percentage of what's taken out of their paychecks, the laborers' paychecks. So you pay a percentage towards that, and it's very important.
So when you hire people to work in your home,
yes,
then you're responsible for paying into their social security.
Yes, there are different formats which can obviously apply to different scales of projects, but usually, typically in homes, the owner is directly responsible for the labor, which can be daunting, but there are a lot of protections. It's basically a way to cover you from certain liabilities and exposure, which as a foreigner can be a big concern.
Yeah.
You might not know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
So it's great to have that all laid out. right away.
In Uruguay, is it better to renovate or is it better to start from scratch?
That's a great question. And from previous conversations, I think we can divide it up into two groups. There are the groups who want to live in a consolidated city. So Montevideo, for example, which has all the services of a city. It's walkable, infrastructure, food, amenities. That's fine.
Ciao.
As I was saying, so all the comforts of a city. And luckily in Montevideo, there's a large stock of heritage homes, older homes that are great architectures by great architects.
Like where we are right now?
Like where we are right now.
Yeah.
And the good thing compared to other cities is that it's pretty spread out throughout all the neighborhoods. So that gives you a lot of leeway to play with less desirable areas, but better properties. So when you start playing with those levers is where you can achieve the most bang for your buck. And then the other group, which is the new build group, is usually people who want a closer contact with nature or coastal areas. And the economic equation changes there where there's lower quality stock of available homes to purchase, and buying a plot and building what you actually want makes more sense.
Right. One of the things in my 7 things that frustrate me about Uruguay was about the lack of insulation in homes. And so this is definitely something, like a lot of houses on the coast are built for summer use only, right?
Exactly.
So if somebody wanted to live there year round.
Yeah, they were never thought for year-round living. And summers can be hot and winters can be cold, and add the humidity on top of that, and you have a recipe to not be as comfortable as you can.
Absolutely. Okay, so foreigners often ask as well if they can buy property and land and build. I mean, we've answered that in other videos, but anything you'd like to add?
Just in our experience working with our clients, we know firsthand that they've been able to buy and renovate with us without having their permanent residency or citizenship. So it's definitely possible. What we've also found out, speaking with other legal experts and realtors, is that it's a cash-only business in the sense that it's almost impossible to acquire a mortgage or a loan being a foreigner. So it's just something to keep in mind, but it is possible.
Cool. All right then. So, in your experience, and you guys have had how many years experience?
Well, experience working, we've been working for almost 10 years now.
Wow.
And then as an independent studio, the last 3 years.
Amazing.
So yeah.
You look so young.
In the architectural world, we're still infants.
But you actually, all 3 of you teach at the university, give classes, right?
We do, yes. We started, this is our 2nd year. We all got in through a public contest, which, you turn in your CV and they evaluate. And luckily, all 3 of us were integrated into the faculty. So
amazing.
We're very excited about that.
So in your experience, when foreigners come here to Uruguay, what are the mistakes that they often make?
So another great story, we got a call from a client, and they told us they've been knocking down some trees on their new property, and now all the neighbors were angry, and they were up in arms, and they were calling the police, and they were getting letters in the mail, from local authorities. And what we tried to tell them was that they had no way of knowing, but had they contacted, local trusted professionals, we would have told them,
like ourselves,
or other people, yes.
Yeah.
They would have told them that in some areas the trees are protected because of the local landscape. So they are some protected areas where with a simple permit they'll allow you to update your property and keep it up in shape. But yeah, with a simple permit, we would have told them they cannot come down. They just have to replant some other trees, and it would have saved them a lot of headaches
and not the best introduction to the neighborhood, right?
Leaning on local professionals can be so important because sometimes permits and municipalities can be so specific, all the way from state scale to neighborhood to street level. So just having someone in your corner can make the whole process a lot easier.
At the time that they're buying, what should they be aware of there?
Well, again, once you lean on professional help, they can tell you, you know, the potential that you have on your property, so you make sure that you can do what you actually want to do, which can sometimes be tricky. So yeah, there's a lot of codes that it's all structured, it's well laid out, but it can sometimes be hard to arrive at the proper information. So just making sure you're not getting into something, you know, that can be a pickle later on.
Yeah, I had a client recently that contacted me to say that she wanted to buy a large plot of land and she wanted to be able to divide it up,
Right.
only to find out that that wasn't allowed in the area where she wanted to buy the land.
Exactly. So those cases are very common, or, you know, how large can we build, or can we knock this down, or, you know, can we build a pool, just something like that. You know, usually the cases that are the most common.
So that definitely needs to be checked out before you even think about buying land.
Yeah, and this can be done, you know, via architects, which tend to be the centralized figure in finding out all these things, even though it does involve, you know, accountants or lawyers or whatnot, but it's a whole network, and, you know, having someone, again, in your corner that can guide you through that,
That's really,
it makes it a lot easier.
yeah, that is a great point. The architect is the central figure for that, because now I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about several people that I've talked to just recently who, again, wanting to buy, and their realtor told them that they could, and their accountant told them that, and they felt like they were in a ping pong game.
Right.
So they could have gotten out of that ping pong game by talking to a trusted architect.
Yeah, you know, realtors, sometimes they want to sell properties, and they'll tell you all the available information, but, you know, having someone in your corner, again, who can kind of take a step back from those interests and just help you out to lay all the information out with full transparency, that's what can sometimes help and place each player, you know, on the board.
Yeah.
where they work best.
Yeah, that's true. So building is pretty different. You already mentioned an example here in Uruguay compared to the US.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about the construction systems here that are most common.
So yeah, we had a client who spent the winter here, and he asked us, why is the house so cold and so humid and damp?
Yeah.
And it kind of ties back to what you spoke about earlier. You know, the traditional construction system involves a lot of brick, a lot of concrete, and what we call a wet methodology, which is, you know, incorporating water to it. So you're adding water to a cold climate where it's humid, it takes a long time to dry, and that kind of derives at all the issues that most houses have here in Uruguay. And, you know, the market also has changed a lot. So a lot of new systems are coming in, you know, steel framing or wood framing, double glazed windows are way more common and accessible, and that makes living a lot more comfortable. So all the older issues of having, you know, good thermal comfort, good acoustics, that's on the way up. So that can sometimes be the main difference that shocks people.
Right. In apartments here in Montevideo, what kind of age is the best range for when they were built best and when they're built more shoddily?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
That's a good question. So what we always tell clients, because, you know, sometimes people bring their own investigation into it, and they've been looking online and looking at prices, and they're shocked that, you know, new apartments that aren't necessarily big or comfortable, they're very expensive. And we tell them there's a certain period, you know, definitely before the 1990s, all the way back maybe until the 30s or 40s, that's a really sweet spot for quality build, and all these properties that have a lot more square meters and, you know, great facades and high ceilings and big spaces that, you know, sometimes they just need a little tweak in the layout to accommodate a more modern, contemporary lifestyle. So, you know, think of open kitchens, open plans, you know, all this potential that we now have. So yeah, you know, with some quick electrical and plumbing, you're in a quality property that it's very difficult to achieve nowadays, just with market, you know, dynamics.
Interesting. And what surprises people from the US regarding homes here, like those older homes that we're talking about that have great potential and lots more square meters? You mentioned kitchens already, right?
Yeah. So kitchens are a big one because, nowadays people spend a lot of time in their kitchens, which is something that they didn't do in previous decades. So maybe a house or an apartment from the 30s or 40s or even 50s or 60s, they have service rooms and closed off kitchens and maybe even a service elevator. And all these spaces were thought for people that weren't as visible in daily life.
Right. So the kitchens were made for a live-in help.
Exactly. We had a client who had a little doorbell underneath the dining table to call the service, and they
I
were
had
like,
one of that in
"What
my
was
old
that?"
house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's common to see them in bedrooms, but under the table, that's luxury.
Uruguay is big on paperwork, especially for building and when you're renovating properties. So, can you give me an overview of the permits and regulations?
Of course. So, again, when working with clients, we try to be as transparent and as thorough as possible. As we like to say, we like to throw the book at them with this type of subjects, just because, when you're a foreigner, you're coming to a different country and you don't know what you're exposed to. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So it seems
The
logical.
unknown unknowns.
It seems logical, but it's very important to make an emphasis on that. And permits, it comes down to a liability issue. So what we spoke about, hiring labor, that usually goes through a channel where you, as the homeowner, are responsible to have them on your payroll and pay a certain percentage towards retirement, health, and a bunch of other funds. So it's very important that you're locked into that system.
And that's encapsulated in the famous term BPS.
BPS.
Right.
It's the Bank of Provisional Security. So, Social Security dues is what we kind of umbrella term it. And yet, there can be a lot of consequences if you don't go down that road of doing everything properly, which sounds like an obvious must do, but culturally, that's where the South America reputation kind of comes in. And it's very important because, one, the liability, and two, if you want to sell your property, they require everything be up to date and that you paid all your Social Security dues. So you can have an inspection and they'll see that you added a new kitchen or a new bedroom. They were like, you didn't pay any dues on this. And that's where they can block loans for potential buyers. So it's very important.
So you could have paid all cash, but when you want to sell on your property, if you did renovations or you built it indeed and you didn't regularize it at the time, you've got consequences.
Yeah, it's a hassle. It's a hassle that it can be avoidable from the get-go. So having all the information laid out before you start a process or a plan, we think is very important. And I think customers tend to value the information, even if it can be scary at first.
Yeah, I mean, and this is all part of why Uruguay has high costs compared to other Latin American countries, but also has a very high quality of life because, for example, people in construction earn reasonably well. And they have their rights, etc. And so that's part of our job to. It's
a dignified trade, yes, and it's been a decades-long struggle. It doesn't have it's not all butterflies and rainbows, but it is structured and people know their rights. And when everything's laid out in front of you with information, it just makes everything more transparent and clearer. So again, a lot of bureaucracy, but again, it does have structure.
I have done renovations on about 3 properties and multiple on one of them. And when I tell people from abroad, that we always hired and worked with a trusted architect to do that, they'd be like, really? Why? And I'm like, I would never, ever start without actually working with an architect. And they're like, why? Why don't you just hire a constructor and cut out that middle person? Will you explain why that's the 2 different roles that there are?
Sure. So mostly people from the United States, they're accustomed to the building contractor. So, it's a figure that you hire and they do what you ask them to do. And they have their own people and that's that. So here in Uruguay, we do have that figure of the contractor, but just to execute labor, and sometimes they have their own labor force that they're head of. And then you have the architect, which in one way is the person or the figure that takes forward the design phase, quoting and reaching out to trusted providers, and then carrying out, the actual construction supervision and all the permits. But what they also are required by law, which is sometimes what surprises people, is that you need the architect to sign off on the BPS permits or the municipal permits. So that's a way to understand why the architect is central to all that. So the required by law aspect of it, and then the role of centralizing and coordinating all these figures and actors and tasks, which can be daunting. You can imagine taking on a project of renovating a house. You need to reach out carpenters, countertops, labor, plumbers, electricians. And in Uruguay, because of our size of market, it's usually the architect that centralizes those tasks. Customers really value that because they see the amount of time and effort that it takes to reach out, coordinate, call, get back, follow up, and that can be highly valuable to clients, and solves a lot of problems, a lot of time, and sometimes a lot of money.
Yeah. And you've actually had clients that are not even in Uruguay at the time that you're doing their build or their renovation, right?
Yeah. We've had clients who, they come to Uruguay for 1 week, they sign off their property titles, and they transfer the money to buy the new property, and they're gone. They have to go back to sell their original homes, tie up all their remaining errands and whatnot. And what we offer there is again, build this relationship through continuous communication, even if it's online, being transparent, being thorough, setting up meetings. And then during the construction phase, we have these instruments that are called weekly reports, where we include some images and a brief summary of what was done during that week, which helps people feel part of the process, even though they might be thousands of miles or kilometers away. And this can also include payment schedules, so they see their expenses all laid out. What can they expect when they need to move money? Have it all laid out in front of them, which can be super helpful to them. But I think the most important thing about that is the communication and being transparent to create that relationship between the client and us of just trust and make them feel a part of the process.
Yeah, well, you're doing a great job, because when I reached out to a number of your clients to be able to see if we could recommend you on the Uruguay website, we ask a series of questions, and we're like, be frank with us. Your clients really love your process, and I even talked to a lady from Argentina who said that later on she took you over to Argentina to do renovations on her house there.
Yeah, we love her.
But really, they were very impressed by the reporting system, the weekly reports of what it was that you had done, what was coming up next week. They felt extremely informed.
Yeah, and sometimes people aren't used to working with architects. It's actually very common. Most people don't work with architects,
right?
And so they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
Again, so
that's right. Now I'm thinking about it. I remember the one couple who have been based just outside of San Francisco, and they were telling me that the treatment that they had with you guys was comparative to with this really, really top architect from the US. So I was like, all right.
Hopefully.
Yeah, you can take that one. You can take
that
one.
I'll accept that compliment.
Yeah, definitely. Anything that you want to add before we finish?
I think just from our experience, and being a foreigner myself twice, so going to the US and coming back to Uruguay, it can be daunting. New people, new culture, new ways of living. So just the importance of reaching out and having trusted, like a trusted network that you can rely on, which is something that you do, obviously.
Yeah, that's what we try and do on the Uruguay website in our trusted service providers.
Yeah, so
section.
even if your plans or projects don't come to term, I think having that relationship of having everything out on the table and being transparent and very thorough with all the information, I think that's what people are really after, you know, in search of a better life, or, you know, more peaceful lands, which, you know, it's a common theme nowadays. But yeah, just Uruguay's a great place. We're happy to have you, and hope everyone enjoys their time here.
Cool, that's great. Well, thank you so much. Super helpful.